what's the word people always use? Escalation. Escalations are happening in Iran, specifically when it comes to the USS Abraham Lincoln is in the region, and because of that, it seems like we are having some incidents happening. I say incidents happening as if this is like a natural phenomenon. Iran is doing something. In one instance, Iranian drone has been shot down because it was close to USS Abraham Lincoln. So we have that instance of Iranian drone being shot down because of a threat or a perceived threat. And separately, it looks like Iran has tried to seize a U.S. tanker, or specifically a tanker with a U.S. flag on it. I don't think they apologized for any of this. They said, "Okay, we this was an accident. We didn't see it. This seemed to have been planned." So we have Iran definitely posturing itself. I think that's the best they can get away with now, posturing itself against sort of the statute of America and seemingly getting away with it. At the same time, Iran has been demanding that the negotiations will be moved from Istanbul or from Ankara, basically from Turkey to Muscat in Oman. So another example of basically them demanding. They're also saying nothing will happen if US threats us, and Trump basically says, eh, let's have a deal. Let's have some sort of a deal. Not to mention when it comes to the deal that would be talked about specifically, if I'm not sure if there was confirmation if it is being moved to Oman, but if it does or if it doesn't, the negotiations wouldn't be about missile sites of Iran. It wouldn't be about their funding of terrorist organizations. It would only be about the nuclear stuff. Um, so even if that deal goes through, that's a terrible deal since it doesn't deal with the fundamental issues of when it comes to dealing with Iran. Welcome to the Daily Objective. My name is Daniel, and joining me today is James Valiant. James, you wanted the topic. I talked about Iran a few days ago, but we had a couple, I think, important events that happened. But James, any thoughts from you as we start?
Well, as we've said many times, Iran has committed so many acts of war, has killed so many Americans and Israelis over the better part of now, what, 46 years? I mean, killed many, many, many Americans and many, many, many Israelis. They've been the world's biggest supporter of terrorism. They're getting ICBM technology. They've been working, I don't care how fast or slow, they've been working on getting a nuclear bomb, even as they scream death to America, death to Israel. So this is decades overdue, as we've long said. Frankly, when the missile strike on Israel happened, two different missile strikes on Israel happened. That should have been a signal that we should have taken out the leadership. Since then, of course, we've had protests in the streets in every province of Iran, untold thousands, tens of thousands, and I really don't know how many because, of course, communications have been shut off by this evil regime, this totalitarian regime. Unknown tens of thousands of people have been killed. We really don't know what the numbers are. Mr. Trump, when he said help is on the way, in effect, got people, as we've discussed, out, only encouraged people to get out into the streets, only to be slaughtered and arrested by their own government. And he owes America for its own security. He owes the region. He owes international trade. He owes now, with his promise, the Iranian people doing something about it. If he does not do something very strong, very powerful, direct against the leadership of Iran, he will have, in my view, violated a clear promise. When you draw a red line like that and you don't follow up, you've really damaged U.S. deterrence and deterrent authority. As you pointed out before we came on air here, he ought to have had the resources. He ought to have had an aircraft carrier group in there prepared to do it because he had made earlier promises. If you continue to attack, you're going to get it. They got attacked. People didn't die, so he overlooked it, you'll recall. And so he let them get away with it then. And the fear was, of course, escalation, escalation. We don't want a regional war and all that. But because he was spreading his resources to places like the coast of Venezuela, he had to worry about China still. Obviously, the world is a big and complex place. America cannot be the whole world's policeman. But it took him a while to get effective resources that could do a serious strike on Iran. But he should have had them there in the first place. You're absolutely right. But now he's saying that if they're willing to do a nuclear arms deal, that would prevent him from doing this attack. Taken at face value, that's a despicable statement. I mean, even taken at face value, because what I'm hoping is that that's a head fake, just totally luring them into a sense of security, so buys him time to get the resources lined up. And he may still be needing to get resources lined up to do this properly. Let's hope that's the case, that it's just a giant head fake, because last time, before he attacked, the previous attack on the Israeli or the Iranian nuclear facilities, he said Israelis, da, 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 and that all turned out to be a lie and just a head fake. So I'm hoping that this again is just another head fake as he's preparing for a serious attack against Iranian security forces and their top leadership, which is really what needs to happen. It would be a benevolent thing that would transform the world should he do that. So, taken at face value, it's utterly despicable, as you point out. I mean, not even putting on the table their violence across the region, how they are aggressive, not only a totalitarian dictatorship of the most savage kind, but they're an aggressive one. Through their proxies, they have shut down international trade in the Red Sea. They've helped launch attacks on Israel from various directions, etc. I could go on and on and on. So, what he's saying at face value is absolutely despicable. Absolutely despicable. But in any case, the one proviso here is that let's hope he's lying. The best thing that could be said for this despicable statement, I won't attack if you engage in a nuclear negotiation with me, utterly despicable statement. Let's hope that's a lie. The only way to salvage Trump here is to believe that it's a lie, and that once he has his forces lined up, he's actively preparing to do that. On the one side, you've got friends of his saying, don't do it at all. Don't do it at all. You've got your Tucker Carlson, who's been a guest at the White House recently, saying, don't do it at all. And so that diminishes it. But as you point out accurately, taken at face value, this is utterly despicable. He's willing to sell out world security for an agreement with people we know cannot be trusted, have violated every agreement we've ever had with them. And he's willing to sell out the Iranian people and the American people and the Israeli people and world safety and security for the what? To have a nuclear deal with these utterly untrustworthy monsters? At face value, it's despicable. And the only hope one could have is that this is another head fake lie. And in a military context, I can understand that. The one time I really would allow politicians to keep secrets and lie is in moments like this, where there's military action that's about to happen. But as you pointed out before our going on air, he should have had the resources there before, so that unknown thousands of Iranians might still be alive.
And yeah, and I've said this. I think I've said this yesterday and the day before. To some extent, and I wanna like with a bit of a proviso. I don't really care as much for the Iranian people. They are suffering the consequences of their own government. I think we have missed a good opportunity, and I think that should be fundamentally the way we look at it. Because look at it. If we James, I told you, I just started rereading the Sherman's March through the South, and the way he talks about his soldier, he is very sad about what they, or he is to some extent sad about the damage they've inflicted on the southern civilian population, but many times he said he wouldn't trade a life of a single Union soldier for however many lives of like Southern civilians, and that is what I'm worried about. When during those protests, that was the perfect time to attack. I don't necessarily, and to some extent, I do care because I look at the best within the Iranian people, and the people who really stood up are the best. So I do have respect for that. But sort of from our point of view, I care about the lives of American soldiers that now might be more at risk because we didn't take the best opportunity. I worry about the lives of Israeli soldiers or any soldiers. If Europe gets involved in any way, soldiers from my own country. I mean, when I talk about Slovakia, Slovak soldiers were in Iraq. They were in Afghanistan. We also suffer the consequences of bad foreign policy. So that is why I'm being worried about not taking the best opportunity.
Well, you have
Just
good reason.
just a few more things.
Yeah.
One, because you said about America, not in a sense having the arsenal to be everywhere in the world at once. And to the extent it is able to be at so many places is incredible. And I'd like to congratulate because I don't know, maybe you've missed it, but a Trump class battleship is being constructed. We are going to name a battleship after Trump. Or specifically a class of
A
battleship
new
after
class of
Trump,
warships.
which
Yeah.
is, another thing that's sort of unprecedented, another thing that's sort of like goes to the
Well,
narcissism of a certain
you,
person, but I just
yeah,
love
but
that.
look at the names of our aircraft carriers and our aircraft carrier groups.
No,
The Gerald
no,
Ford,
no,
the
no.
Abraham Lincoln, the
Classes are
class.
named after states. So it's
Normally, yeah,
Iowa class.
exactly. Exactly. The distinction is between a whole class of ships that
Yeah,
he intends
and
to build.
even then, even when we don't name ships after the current living presidents, or
The current, right.
I think
Normally,
it's
will wait until it's a post presidential honor. The Romans used to deify their emperors, but normally after they died. It was very improper to deify a Roman emperor during his lifetime, and Romans looked at that askance, at least for the first couple centuries of of the empire. Yeah, it's kind of rude, and it's not cricket. But Trump wants his name on everything. But let's even set that aside for a second. We had in effect an admission from Netanyahu the other day that Israeli soldiers were sacrificed to protect Palestinian civilians. That is a moral crime. That is a moral crime. No more Israelis need to die to protect Palestinians. The death of Palestinians was the responsibility of the Palestinian attackers, just as the death of German civilians during World War II wasn't the responsibility of the Allies. It was the fault of the Nazis who started the war. We should look at it in that same moral way. And yes, even way back in 79, when the Iranian Revolution happened, the Islamic Revolution in Iran happened, and even in 1983, way before we knew what the Iranian people thought, with the clarity I think we're getting now about what the Iranian people really want. They do want something better. I mean, maybe a variety of different political factions there, but the majority of Iranian people clearly, apparently want something different. These protests happen in all of the provinces. Even then, America should have treated it as an act of war and should have done something very decisive about the Iranian regime, regardless of what the Iranian people wanted. Iran was a threat. And if we had done what was proper way back then, more than 40 years ago, then I would have the same principle. Do not sacrifice a single American on behalf of doing what needs to be done against Iran. However, there is a consistency here of interests, and that I would focus on. It would be enormously better for everybody. Ayn Rand, one of her great points is between rational people, if this is a reality oriented thing, there is no conflict of interest. The practical and the moral is correct. Your rights and my rights are aligned when we properly understand what rights are. There's no contradiction between your freedom of speech and my freedom against being attacked. Rights must be seen as a logical unity. Similarly, here, the interests of the world, the conflict between what's best for everybody, and I mean that, best for everybody, does not conflict, it cannot be seen as being in conflict with what is best for the United States. and for Western security. America should obviously put its priority and should never engage in an altruistic war like we did in Vietnam, for example, losing tens of thousands of lives for what? Or the Afghanistan war, being there for 20 years at least, losing, uh, for a purely altruistic purpose, losing lives of young Americans and British soldiers. That is just absolutely disgusting to me. So, yeah. And when we fight a war, we have to put our soldiers' lives ahead, because they're part of our war machine to do something about it. Put our soldiers' lives ahead of even the civilians there. Now, a dictatorship may be hard to overthrow, though. Modern technology has allowed totalitarian governments to stay in power by controlling communications, by the technology, simply the military technology, the internal security technology. So, if we can accomplish all of these things at once, so much the better, though, Daniel. There's no real conflict here. And also, when a president makes a promise and encourages people to take to the streets, and those people take to the streets and get slaughtered, then you are partially responsible for what's going on there right now because you promised help was on the way. You got their hopes up. So I think all of those factors need to be taken into consideration. But obviously, America's own security and the general security of the West is what the president's value has to be here. And we cannot sacrifice our soldiers. America, though, has demonstrated its capacity to basically take out these podunk governments from the air. And what happens on the ground should be left to the Iranians to decide, in my view. No, and if a new regime that becomes threatening, like the current regime, comes to power, then take them out too. Keep taking them out until there's no more aggressive threat to the world. That's the way we have to approach that. But on the surface of it, there's no conflict between what are the real long-term interests of the Iranian people and the real long-term interests of American and Western security. But again, I wouldn't approach this altruistically, primarily, as you point out. But Trump opened his mouth and started flapjawing in a way that got people, I think only encouraged Iranian people, if they heard about it, to come out and protest and get mowed down in the streets. So he has some moral responsibility there as well in this particular context. And now we've got the Iranian drone coming to the U.S. as Abraham Lincoln. See, we name the things after previous presidents and a great man like Abraham Lincoln. But, the drone was shot down by the Abraham Lincoln. And what do you suppose the Iranian drone was doing there? It was either doing spy work, reconnaissance work, or it meant to do an attack. You just shoot down the Iranian drone when it gets close enough because they're trying to see what the American capacity there, at the very least, they're trying to see what the American capacity is becoming there. Or when they try and take over an oil tanker with an American flag on it, it's clear what they're trying to do. And that is further aggression and direct aggression against the United States. Now, count all the various reasons that demand that Trump takes action. Look at all the various reasons that demand that Trump take action. Iranians have kidnapped American diplomats. They've slaughtered American soldiers by the hundreds in Beirut. They have killed Americans in Iraq. Through their proxies. They've shut down international trade in the Red Sea for a while. They have attacked Israel, our best ally in the region. America, just America, has its own selfish, I mean that in the term rational self-interest, their own self-interested reasons to do something, to alter, to regime change, to take out the leadership and security apparatus of that leadership within Iran. When you add to not just American and Western interests generally, the fact that Trump has made this promise, and that could have every province in Iran was involved in this latest rebellion. But every other time that the Iranian people have rose up and tried to do something, for all I can see, America never lifted a pinky finger to even help them. Instead, President Obama sent pallets of cash over to them, signed a nuclear agreement, which they immediately violated. You cannot trust these Iranian monsters. Taken at face value is, okay, we won't attack if you engage in nuclear talks with us. It is a despicable statement. And that can only be justified if it's a lie and he really means to do something serious against the Iranian leadership, as he promised the Iranian people. And that promise may have cost thousands of Iranians their lives. No, I think that the moral and the practical are one. I think that the conflicts between rational, civilized people are in harmony. And so it will be good for the world that Iran doesn't develop ICBMs that can reach Europe as they're doing right now. I think it would be good for the world if China doesn't get a source for, like Iran for their oil. I think it would be good for international trade if Iran, through its proxies, could no longer shut down trade in the Red Sea. It would certainly be good for Israel. And Trump said, when asked in a press conference, this is interesting. The reporter asked, do you think that an attack on Iran would cause a regional war? Because one of the things the supreme leader of Iran said, America, if you attack us, this will definitely cause a regional war. I myself don't see what the others in the area might be able to do or would respond to, or if he could actually politically get away with attacking other neighbors in the region. The thing I fear is another attack on Israel. And thank goodness Israel took out most of their, air defenses and a lot of their capacity to do that. But one thing we might expect is another attack on Israel should we do this. So America and Israel have to coordinate this, do this in harmony so that Israel can get their shield up to protect themselves again. And once more, the people that I fear for are Israelis right now. Should we do this? But we need to do this. And the long-term interests of Israel and the United States are in favor of doing this. That's the way my full analysis would be of this. Trump said in response to the Supreme Leader's, we'll find out. But he connected it with, if you don't negotiate and do what I say, you will find out if it starts a regional war. But I don't think it really does have the capacity to start a whole regional war. What it would do, perhaps, is give us a last-ditch attempt by Iran to launch another attack on Israel, for which Israel and America must be prepared. And we, too, are responsible as Americans. As an American, I feel responsible that if we launch an attack on Iranian leadership, we should help Israel from what might be an expected counter attack. We need to have our ships in the area protected. And I don't think that we need boots on the ground, or at least many boots on the ground to do this. I'm excluding spies and that sort of thing, but we can take out the leadership facilities, most of the leadership, the security forces in Iran, and we should do that. America owes it to itself and to the world, and now to the Iranians, to whom they've made a promise. But the interests of America, you're right, the interests of America and the Western world in general should be Trump's focus. And not a single American life is worth sparing any of the Iranian bad guys, even potentially Iranian civilians. Because if America does do an attack on the Iranian leadership, it could have the collateral damage of Iranians. And in this case, maybe truly innocent Iranians who are fighting for something better. Do you see my point?
When Iran talks of, aren't all wars regional? What is even like, as opposed to what?
A world war.
Well, that's a region. The world is a region. The planet
Well, yeah,
Earth.
I guess so.
Uh,
The broadest region in which wars today can reach. Yeah,
so far.
but they're threatening to involve other nations in the area, in effect.
Yeah,
Um,
but even then, I don't really like. Is Iran like going to what bomb Iraq or Saudi Arabia or Jordan or Qatar or
well,
technically all of those have like besides I don't think Iran has
but
but all of those have American bases, so maybe that's what they are meaning to say.
Saudi Arabia is a military ally of the United States. We sell them fighter jets where
Oh, so
they
it's
don't
like
like
Qatar and Jordan and whatnot.
yeah, the United Arab Emirates, Jordan certainly has at least been cooperating with American action there, et cetera, et cetera. So what does he mean? Is he going to attack all of the American bases that are in Iraq? Does he mean to attack American strategic allies like Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and the United Arab Emirates? That seems to be what he's saying, because he didn't just specify the Zionist entity. But I really think that that would be very counterproductive to the region, right? And so I'm not sure that Iran would do that. But as I say, if so, America should try to defend those regions. I mean, I wouldn't be an ally with the Saudis at all. I wouldn't be, if I was the American president, I wouldn't be selling them advanced fighter jets, for example. I wouldn't be bending over backwards just to create an Abraham Accord regional agreement. Those nations should fear America and Israel to the point that they capitulate, make peace, and we shouldn't be morally legitimizing governments that don't respect individual rights. But on the other hand, we should be so decisive in our destroying their capacity to launch attacks against other regional rivals, let's put it that way, to Iran, with whom America does business, like Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and the United Arab Emirates, which come to mind, right? So if he means a regional attack, well, that means that America has to preemptively destroy as much of Iran's capacity to attack anybody. Anybody. That's what needs to happen. We need to hit their key intelligence facilities, their key military facilities, certainly their leadership, certainly the security forces that are oppressing the Iranian people. But it's true that America has a big responsibility here. But I still think that American military technology is so powerful and sophisticated, we can do nearly all of that from the air. We can do nearly all of that with missiles. And we have now the capacity to launch the most sophisticated missiles that you can imagine. Right now, we're getting that. Now, let's hope that it's only a question of getting the chess pieces in place. Let's hope that he is lying and that he wouldn't sell out all of those security interests and the promise he made to the Iranian people for some nuclear deal. That would be a moral obscenity in my mind. But I don't see a conflict of interest between any of these things. And I see that threat from Iran as only meaning that we have to do more. We have to make sure, as best as we can at least, that Iran can't hurt any other regional country, especially Israel. As I say, that's where I really fear the problem. Attacking another Muslim country might be problematic for various other reasons. Because one of the things is, if America attacks Iran, the other Muslim countries, whether Shia or Sunni, might complain, "Oh, you shouldn't be doing this, America." Should Iran do that, that would spoil their capacity for, anti-American unity in the region from Muslim countries in general. So I think that there's political reasons that would make that problematic for Iran. But on the other hand, we should destroy their capacity to do that, even if they have that in mind. I seriously think, though, that there's a credible threat that whatever forces they have left to throw at Israel, they might throw at Israel if we do it. You see, that really seems like it's could happen. But that means we have to be overwhelming, preemptive, wipe out their military capacity, what's left of their military capacity, when we go after their leadership simultaneously. So this does mean getting a bunch of chess pieces on the board and getting enough positioned and enough there so that we can do what would be an overwhelming attack that would destroy their capacity to attack other nations and ensure that the leadership is gone, so that the Iranian people, who are for the first time in almost 50 years across the country in large numbers standing up. I mean, we've long suspected and thought that, most Iranians really want something better, and they really seem to be demonstrating that. And if it is even something significantly better than what is today in place, it would be a step in the right direction for world security, for cutting off oil, at least a major oil supply to China, a drone supply for Russia, an attacker against Israel, the supporters of the Houthis who cut off trade in the Red Sea. World security would be better. The Iranian people would be better. And that's not necessarily in conflict with American and Western security interests. which though should be the primary goal of the President of the United States. And yes, the loss of a single American life to protect, Iranians would be morally incorrect in my view. Even in this case, see, with the Palestinians, I couldn't see much evidence of all of innocent, civilians. In the case of Iran, I do, but the moral calculation doesn't change. If the Iranian government must be taken out, they must be taken out, Daniel. And that means we have to be overwhelming in our capacity for them to engage in making this a regional war. That is, take out their entire capacity to engage in aggressive warfare. All of their missile sites, all of their air bases, all of it.
We have a super chat from Gail. Thank you so much. A super chat from PC. Thank you so much. It says, James, last week at pro-Palestine march, English people held up signs with the images of the supreme leader. Shocking. It's not surprising.
Not really
Those things
surprising.
are ideologically consistent.
Disgusting, but not surprising.
We also have a super chat from Bonnie. Thank you so much. And a super chat from PC again. Thank you so much. He says, Starmer has not closed embassy of the IRGC, or I think we probably mean Iran. And yeah, of course not. I
But
mean,
at least
why?
Europeans are now calling the Iranian Revolutionary Guard a terrorist group. I mean, these steps seem like just baby steps in the recognition of what is basic reality. These are savage. The country is run by savage theocrats. It's a totalitarian government, as we can see before our eyes now, as they mow down unknown tens of thousands of their own people who are protesting in every province, shutting down their free speech, their communication with the world and with each other. Well, we need to come stop their communication with their security forces, destroy their security forces, take out their leadership, and take out their military capacity to make this a regional war. And I truly fear for Israel here, for reasons I've just explained. I hope I've made sense here.
And yeah, and absolutely. And I would say, yeah, close down all the embassies of Iran. And if we have, because I think a big problem when it comes to Iran is you cannot renounce the citizenship, meaning if you have Iranian passport, you're oftentimes screwed. Give a refugee status to every single like Iranian abroad. I don't see why
Where I
we are
grew
like
up in
dealing
Los
with it.
Angeles, where I grew up in Los Angeles, there's a large Iranian refugee population. Fortunately, America did take in asylum seekers when the Islamic Revolution in Iran happened in 1979. In the wake of that, America fortunately took in many asylum seekers. And if you're fleeing from that evil regime, we ought to grant them legal residency in civilized countries, it seems to me. Those people are victims. And if they want to go home and help make, if they do remember their country being a better place, at least before 1979, not a perfect place, but a better place before 1979, we should encourage that as well. There's a large Iranian refugee population here in Southern California, and in my interaction and experience with them, they're good people. They're Western-minded people who really want something better. And if that's at all a reflection of a significant portion of the Iranian population, then that bodes something good. It's not like Iraq. It's not like Afghanistan, where we didn't do what it took to sort of stay there and make something better. We were all just doing it for altruistic reasons, completely, and working through proxies completely. That is totally the wrong way to do war. Let Afghanistan and Iraq, which in my mind were largely failure, Iraq a total failure, Iraq largely a failure for Americans,
Well,
for
Iraq was
American
a
interests.
great success about like first week or so when we took down Saddam, and
See,
then we were.
we can take out governments like that. The question is, what do we do? Or do we act altruistically and try to nation build? And all we need to do is educate them, in their own, send them to their own mosques or educate girls, and that'll change everything? No, we would have to treat it like America did after World War II. We occupied Western Germany. Britain and the United States occupied Western Germany, and we were going to stay there as long as it took to denazify the place. Similarly with Japan, America occupied Japan, and we said we were going to stay there as long as it takes to make sure that this sticks. This new constitution that recognized freedom of speech and a parliamentary form of government. Um, and in both cases, it had a very positive impact, not just on American security and Western security, but also on the German and Japanese people. I don't think there's a conflict of interest between civilized people. I think if you do the moral thing, it will have a good effect on everyone. And across the board, this would be a body blow to China if we took out the Iranian regime, and Russia, and North Korea, and all the bad actors in the region, their proxies. This would help the security of world trade, American interest in the region, and Israel. Israel, my God, the Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, their major funders were Iran. But no, America should put its interests first, but its interests and Israel's interests are aligned here, coordinated here. There is no conflict of interest between rational and civilized men. There is no conflict of interest between rational and civilized people or nations.
Somebody in the chat says there is such a thing as conflict of interest. Give us an example, and maybe we can talk about it because we are talking broadly and abstractly, and you in the chat are also talking broadly and
And I would
abstractly.
point
So
out what I mean is rational, civilized people. Okay,
yeah, but
there
even
is a
that
conflict of interest
is
between
yeah.
dictators. Yeah, there is a conflict of interest between dictatorships and freedom-loving countries. Yeah, those conflicts of interest there. Yeah, conflicts of interest between people who want peace, civilization, a chance for their people to have some prosperity, to develop their own countries. World trade is a good thing. That's why I opposed Trump's tariffs. The way Trump is using tariffs is absolutely obscene, precisely because trade is a win-win situation. When you interfere with international trade between peaceful, productive nations, it's not good for either nation.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing, so yeah, a person in the chat could give us example. We can maybe talk about it. But sort of connecting to the main topic of this deal, something that really I think has to be said. I've said it that if if there was some sort of a deal that would neutral, well, one somebody said that Iran can do more damage to Saudi Arabia than Israel. That would be a great way to hit two birds with one stone. Or wait, sorry, I heard from PETA we are not supposed to use this aphorism. So feed two birds with one seed. That's what you're supposed to say.
Well,
So
I wouldn't want, in that sense, a chain reaction escalation. But on the other hand, you're right. I don't think we should have diplomatic relations with Saudi Arabia. They too are a theocratic, authoritarian country that does not respect the rights of its own people. But at least they're not as aggressive as Iran. Iran has got these militant proxies that have been attacking US bases there, attacking Israel, attacking Israeli civilians there, and through their proxies, shutting down international trade. They yell death to America and death to Israel as they pursue nuclear technology, as they pursue ballistic missile technology. Yeah, Iran, by developing ballistic missile technology, threatens America potentially, but certainly threatens Europe. And I want to continue trading with the civilized nations of the world, as I say. I think it's a win-win thing. So when you're developing a technology that can threaten Israel and Europe, then what you're doing is you're threatening America's allies. And America has those allies for a self-interested reason. America's interests, should be looked at in a very rigorous way, but America's interests should be looked at in that broad a conceptual way.
uh, so yeah, going back to the deal, as I've said, it's not if there was like some sort of a deal that could be achieved, that like would completely eliminate the Iranian threat. One, it's fantastical, the idea that you could get some sort of a deal that would basically eliminate Iran as a threat. I mean, it would be preferable if there was a deal that Iran will commit to not developing nuclear weapons and not enriching uranium beyond like 5 to 10%, which is the max you need for civilian use. They will not develop the intercontinental ballistic missiles, and they will not fund the proxies around. So basically, when they would become, if they would become Saudi Arabia, that's the deal. Like you become Saudi Arabia. I still think like it's preferable. I still think we shouldn't like have a
No,
deal with Saudi Arabia, but that's not even on the table. That's not what we're talking about when it comes to
not
deal with
even
deal.
what Trump is
Even
saying.
yeah.
Yeah. And by the way, I mean, can you trust these people? Can you trust dictators? Can you trust monsters who slaughter their own people? Can you trust people who, start wars in the region? Can you trust people who've broken agreements with America? I mean, the very idea of dealing with these people and betraying your red line promise, Mr. Trump, on behalf of some nuclear deal with these people, be serious. But, part of me does hold out hope that this is all a giant head fake. He was the one who pulled out of the deal that Obama had struck with the Iranian government. He was the one who, in effect, made further negotiations difficult or impossible. I don't think he trusts them. They tried to assassinate him. They tried to assassinate a number of Americans and American political leaders, we've now discovered. They're behind so much of the violence around the world against Americans, against Israelis. They're the world sponsor of terrorism. Their violence has reached the Kobar Tower. Their violence reached Argentina in South America. These people are a threat to world peace. They cannot be trusted for any deal, and their survival is a continued threat to civilization.
Um, so somebody brings up the chat, examples of the conflict of interest. They bring up the Arctic resource claims, the South China Sea disputes, including shipping and resource interests. And somebody already pointed out this is the problem of the comments. The problem isn't. The problem is because there are no property rights there. It's in this like weird. It's the same. I don't know, James, if you know that, but do you know who owns space? Who owns space? Apparently, all of humanity owns all of space. Once we meet an alien civilization that has more developed like property rights, they might have a problem with our designation of that. But yeah,
Property
that's the
rights
same
are
thing.
not
That's
collective.
yeah.
Let me just say, property rights are not collective claims, not claims on behalf of a tribe, a race, a nation. Property rights are individual rights. Property belongs to the individuals who develop and use that property. Okay, you cannot wave your arm. You land on a continent that's empty. You cannot establish your right to it by waving your arms around and saying, "Okay, it's mine." And it doesn't matter how many people are involved in that arm waving, claiming it. To establish genuine property rights means you've gone there, you've developed it, and you're still using it. That's what is the basis of property rights, real, ethical property rights. It's not a collective claim. There are no collective rights. I would urge you to read 2 articles by Ayn Rand, the great American philosopher, Man's Rights and Collectivized Rights, which you can find in Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal, and I think in Virtue of Selfishness as well. There are no wave your arms about. And what does the United Nations or some international group have any business speaking for all of humanity for anyway? That's a collectivist notion. That's insane. Nobody owns space because guess what? Nearly all of space is undeveloped. The closest you might come is to say the orbital satellites. Those satellite routes may now be owned by the individual companies and to some extent the countries, because again, countries really don't have rights, but at least countries have jurisdiction, I would say. And I'd make a distinction between legal jurisdiction and individual property rights. I would say that to the extent that we've used space, that creates either a jurisdictional right or an individual property right in the case of private companies.
Yeah, again, people are always acting as if property rights or rights in general are some like intrinsic thing that you can find in nature. No, they are developed, and we develop it. I mean, when we discovered, the radio airwaves, was there some intrinsic understanding of what property rights are? No, it was a new discovery, and of course, because it was discovery in the 20th century or so, it was nationalized immediately because
Right.
that's our understanding of property
Radio
rights in the.
broadcast frequencies were nationalized by my country and most other countries in the world when radio broadcast waves could be used by this new technology called radio. In my mind, it is the radio and television stations that actually developed and used those regional broadcast frequencies. You own that frequency in that area because you were the first one to use it, and you're the one still using it. That makes it yours. Now, you can lose property rights through adverse possession. But there was this conflict. There was this discussion at an award ceremony in the United States where Miss Eilish, the popular singer, said, "It's America. Everything's on stolen land and dot 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 dot." No, stolen land from what? The collective. Native American tribes fought each other, seized territory from one another. How do the point? And you can lose property rights through non-use, through what we call adverse possession in the United States. The point of the matter is that if the population has mostly been wiped out in its undeveloped area, the first person out there to develop it and use it, guess what? It's his or hers. Property rights are not some magical pixie dust thing because someone waves their arms about and claims them. I don't care whether it's Native Americans or some international group saying space belongs to the world. It, it's like saying the Iranian people own the oil, or oil resources are owned collectively by some group of people. No, they're not. They're owned by the people that develop and uh, they were invited in. British oil interests in the 1950s mostly were invited in to develop Iranian oil. And what happened? They nationalized those businesses. In other words, they stole the oil from the private companies that actually had originally even been invited in to develop them. And that was just sheer theft of individual real property rights from the people who developed, found that, extracted it from the land, and sold it. It's theirs.
Yeah, and so we have people in the chat still talking about it. One, give us an example of like, because they are bringing up like a lot of national conflicts of interest, which I would even have a problem. Give us an example of like two individuals having a conflict of interest,
I
and
would
then we
even
can.
go to civilized nations if they understand rights and
Well,
civilization.
he has
For
specific
example,
example. He has specific example. Israel wants the control of the Golan Heights for security reasons. Syria wants to control it for its own interest. It's not complicated. Again, if both, like, why was there why does Israel want the security interest? It's because Syria was a dictatorship that invaded Israel. Like
I said between rational civilized people. So far, the new Syrian government has not yet proven that they are rational, civilized people. And part of that demonstration would be an understanding of why Israel had to occupy and take over the Golan Heights. Now, if they say we're no longer a threat, why should we believe them? They would have to demonstrate they're no longer a threat. But guess what? Israelis are now developing and using that area. Okay, so if they are rational and civilized in Syria, they would recognize all that. So what I'm going to say it again, between rational and civilized people, there are no rational conflicts of interest. Syria, to demonstrate their civilization and rationality, would have to acknowledge why murderous attacks from the Golan Heights, which posed a direct threat to the existence of Israel, why Israel did what they did. And after being there for so long and needing it for security purposes, guess what? It's, in my view, it's become Israel. If Syria can't at least begin to recognize that, they have no business even entering negotiations over it with Israel. For God's sakes.
Yeah, I mean, maybe we can give like individual examples for like better understanding. Let's say James wants this beautiful Nothing Less Than Victory by John David Lewis. It's an
A
incredible
great
book, and
book.
it's understandable why he would want it, right? But James' interest isn't simply I want to acquire this book, because then he could just steal it, right? And that would go against my interest of I really want to keep this beautiful copy of Nothing Less Than Victory. Uh, James' actual interest is I want to acquire that book in a civilized manner. I either want to trade for it something, I want to buy it from, I want to ask for it, or I want to have a different copy. I mean, he might want this specific beautiful copy, but he could get a different one. So
I'd
that's
make you
the
an
actual
offer, but
interest.
if you didn't accept that offer, I would have to go to Amazon.com or my
No,
local
no, but not
bookstore.
even that. If I didn't accept your offer to buy it, that still wouldn't be like your interest was misaligned, or your interest was denied, because your interest wasn't acquire it to by
My
any means.
main
It was
interest is in ending theft. My greater interest, if I want my stuff, if I don't want my books to be stolen, then I have to respect your rights. So all my rights to all my stuff is contingent on uh, an equal understanding, an equal protection of property rights generally. So if I want anything, I have to recognize that first and foremost. If I wanted enough, and maybe if I could strike a price with him, I'd say give you $1 million for it. Maybe Daniel would be willing to do it, but I couldn't force him to sell it for a dime less than it's worth to him, any more than I would want my stuff stolen or taken from me for a dime less than I was willing to sell it for. That's not a conflict of interest. That's a protection of my long-term rights. Unless, of course, I'm willing. If you think of that as a conflict of interest, then you would say my right to rape and pillage some village me
or
is
your
superior.
interest in doing so is being violated.
Interest in doing so. Now, can you? No, no. See, when you really understand rational self-interest, you realize that can never be in your interest to want to go pillage another village. If that, then again, you see, you're not a rational, reality-oriented person at all. Um, if all human relations are voluntary, then all trades are win-wins. I wouldn't engage in a voluntary trade if it wasn't in my self-interest. I presume that goes for the other side of a truly voluntary transaction. But to do it against someone's will is to threaten my rights. You can't drop the context of what it is to be rational. And that's the importance of the proviso. Between rational and civilized people, there are no true conflicts of interest. For example, take Greenland. Mr. Trump cannot saber rattle and threaten because what does that do to world security? If he can't get it in a negotiation with the Kingdom of Denmark, that is to say, get what? Whether a territorial expansion, Iron Dome, military defense facilities, the precious minerals that are there, and all. Let me suggest that what America's interests in Greenland are could have been accomplished with the Danes and the Greenlanders without all of those threats, without any of that saber rattling. When you do that, you are threatening everything. You're not acting rationally. So, Greenland, there's no conflict of interest between the Kingdom of Denmark, the Greenlanders, and America. Right? Negotiation is not finding a compromise when you share principles, because all three groups, the people who live in Greenland, the government of Denmark, and the United States, share common values and interests precisely because they are rational and civilized people.
We have a super chat from Daniel. Thank you so much. He says, "Why do checks and balances exist in the government? Would any conflict of interest that would arise without checks and balances be deemed irrational?" So I think that's like a different concept of check of conflict of interest. When it comes to the government, or when it comes to like businesses, the conflict of interest we mean is sort of, let's say, a president or sort of like a bureaucrat deals with administration of who gets the deal, who gets this like contract for, let's say, highway or something, and his wife is at the board of one of those companies. The conflict of interest is we cannot be certain that his decision wasn't influenced by the fact that he has like a personal gain, or sort of like a familiar gain to get from one of these. So this is what we mean by conflict of interest. In a way, it's like he could act completely rationally, but we cannot determine it because there is this thing. Although technically it does fall in the same way because it comes, I think, from the same uh, the idea that you have like a bureaucrat that decides sort of who
If
gets specifically
if we
the.
can't reach a rational agreement, then we walk away. And one side may be wrong, the other side may be right. But the point is, force is the thing that negates any possibility of voluntary agreements. I mean, if once we establish the precedent or have rules that permit the initiation of force so that the interaction isn't voluntary, then we've destroyed the very possibility of civilized interaction among human beings. And that is the higher priority in terms of everybody's interest.
Uh, with that, so somebody says, and I think we are not maybe, or I think the way Ayn Rand originally talked about it was a little bit different. We have a super chat from Paul Zeus. Thank you so much. Somebody brings up two brothers inherit the property. One lives nearby and has an interest to keep the property. The brother lives abroad and has an interest to sell it. And another example is two developers build a company. One wants to sell it now, and the other one wants to keep developing it further. What would you say?
Well, then
Is
we
that a
understand. Then
conflict
we
of
have to
interest?
understand the way it was inherited. Was it inherited so that it's joint and several ownership, so that it requires the consent of both? In which case, they
I
both
assume for this case, yeah. Let's say.
right. So in that case, they would have to negotiate a settlement. And besides, it's
Well,
inherited
he's saying
property,
that this is a
and it was
conflict
given.
of their interest because one
No,
has an interest in selling it, one has an interest in.
right. But the more important thing is the interest they actually have in voluntary and freedom. First of all, secondly, if they can't come to a rational agreement about it, then I'm afraid we go to law to settle those kind of courts. That's why we have courts to settle disputes between people because there will still be sincere, honest disagreements between people. And once more, I will say my interest in having courts settle that is a greater interest than whatever the court determines. Oh, you get 30%, you get 70%, has to be sold to a third party. But we have to account for the fact that this guy is getting screwed because it was sold at all when he didn't want it sold. So, things like that. But I would urge people to read Ayn Rand's article in The Virtue of Selfishness, Conflicts Between Men's Interests. And she will spell this out in great detail. Look, my interest in the principles of freedom and voluntary interaction are far and above all my other particular, let's put it this way, disagreements with other human beings. In most cases, if you are free, you're free to walk away from any potential dispute or conflict. You're claiming that you can force the guy into your settlement of it means that you can be forced into some settlement that you don't like either. It's not a question of whether this is what I'm getting my way. No, if you start out like that, you're already telling me that you're not rational about it. You inherited the property, say. Well, you inherited the property. If you say, I want my way, you've already said, I'm irrational. I'm not thinking about my long term self interest. I want to initiate force to force him into a situation where he has, in effect, the same rights I do in a situation. That would be destructive for everybody's interests. Please read the article, Conflicts of Interest. Now, that's on a personal moral issue. When it comes to international affairs, actually, it's much more straightforward. The interests of peaceful, civilized nations are in harmony. And that should, in nearly every case, be quite obvious. Well, obvious to me because I have read and studied Ayn Rand's article, Conflicts in Men's Interest. So read The Virtue of Selfishness, read Capitalism and the Unknown Ideal by Ayn Rand, and a lot of this will be answered for you.
Yeah,
And
I
it's
think that.
I understand. I've said something provocative there. I understand this runs against the common sense, of people. But rights are unity. Rights are unity. Rights cannot be protected. You can't think of this guy's rights versus that guy's rights, this right versus that right. You're misunderstanding the concept of rights if you don't see rights as a logical integrated unity. And that is explained very well in Leonard Peikoff's Objectivism, the Philosophy of Ayn Rand, which explains Ayn Rand's position on these things.
Yeah, I'm wondering if the disagreement comes from just different understanding of what conflict really means, or sort of what
Well,
we are
anytime
trying
I'm
to.
in an argument with someone, I have a conflict of interest. It would be better off for me if everyone agreed with me, but I can't force that agreement. And an attempt to force that agreement would go against something which is a much higher interest of mine, freedom of the mind. If I want to have my controversial opinion, then I better believe that everyone has a right to their own opinion. I have to better recognize that everyone, you can't force any opinion on someone. They have to come to it themselves. If I merely disagree, and I can act to pursue my own values and act on my controversial beliefs, then I have my interests defined. If I have to pull out a gun and force someone else, then I'm actually acting in my own long-term disinterest. And that would make everything else that I pursue impossible. So, yeah, read Ayn Rand's Virtue of Selfishness, Ayn Rand's Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal, and you will see that if you properly understand your values, if you are a rational person, then you will understand that among the rational and free, there really can be no true conflict of interest. But if you mean any disagreement, any intellectual disagreement I have, even some legal disagreement on which reasonable minds can differ, means a conflict of interest, then you don't know what I mean. And you don't even understand your correct hierarchy of values here and what is in your actual interest, your actual long-term self-interest. Most people don't even think about that. They think their short-range goal, for example, trumps their actual long-term interest in making sure that humans can only interact in a voluntary way. No, your actual long-term self-interest is in freedom, the respect for individual rights. And if you sacrifice that on behalf of some short-range conflict, you're cutting off your eyes, as Ayn Rand's great analogy. You're pulling out your eyes as the price of admission to an art museum.
Yeah, I think what might be happening here is like a little bit of maybe context dropping, because I'm trying to like remember like when I had like a conflict of interest with somebody, and like let's say I didn't get my like I wanted to go on a date with a girl and she didn't, right? There was like a conflict of interest, and was that like I was disappointed, but it was like my interest in it, or like is that the way I would like
Is that what you want in a romantic relationship? A woman who, with her own eyes, does not want to go out with you? No, because it would be a hellish relationship if she really didn't want to be in it, Daniel.
yeah,
To
I have
say
an
that's a
understanding of
conflict
it.
of interest, or that you could force her to enter a relationship against her will, would actually be self-destructive, Daniel. You would not have a happy relationship. Even if someone should say, okay, well, you have a duty to do this for him, or I'll force her to do this for him,
Yeah, okay,
that
I
still
understand that,
isn't your
and because
self-interest.
we're just going in circles at this
Okay.
point. I don't think we're
Yes.
expanding the episode. People should read, like we cannot explain Ayn Rand's philosophy in like a video on another topic. So
Well, that's true. We were talking about Trump and Iran here, weren't we?
if people are really interested in this, there's no longer conversation with us on a show through a text that will like improve your understanding.
Well, let me
Uh,
put it this way, ladies and gentlemen. Surely you can see that the interests of Europe, the interests of America, the interests of Israel, the interests of the Iranian people are all coordinated here. No, the interests of the dictators in China and Russia, the mullahs in Iran, no, it's not in their interest. I will fully concede that. But they are not what I would call reality oriented, rational people. It's between the rational who understand principles. But surely you can see the coordinated interests of civilized nations in taking down the Iranian government right now. And I hope Mr. Trump sees that. And I hope he's just head faking us and lying lying about saying he won't attack them at all if they agree to. And we've had plenty of provocation from them now. Now they've struck, we've had to take down a drone of theirs coming to the Abraham Lincoln. Now they're trying to stop oil tankers with American flags on them. Now we've been provoked to the point where we can really see the kind of regime this is and what any civilized nation would know they have to do in response. The interests of any civilized country in the world would say get rid of Iran. It would be a world-changing event if we could get a better government in Iran. Surely, friends, you can see that. Even if it comes at the conflict of the mullahs or Putin or Xi. Yeah.
And with that, make sure to join us tomorrow for another episode of the Daily Objective and most likely as well a reality show. So make sure to watch that. Thank you, James, for joining me today. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and bye bye.
Be safe.